The fourth night they knocked, I already knew something was very wrong. I just didn't know how wrong until I checked my back door. I'm 27. I work remotely as a data entry contractor for a logistics company in Indianapolis, Indiana. I rent the bottom unit of a duplex on a quiet street in a neighborhood that's not quite gentrified and not quite rough. Just ordinary. My upstairs neighbor is an older retired man named Gerald who I see maybe twice a week. We wave. That's the extent of our relationship. My girlfriend Priya lives 40 minutes away and stays over on weekends. During the week, it's just me, my laptop, and whatever I'm watching before bed. I work until about 6 p.m. Eat something, watch something, sleep by midnight. Same routine, 5 days a week. Nothing about my life should have attracted what happened that October. The first knock came on a Tuesday at 3:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I woke up and immediately looked at my phone. It was hard and deliberate. Not a neighbor who accidentally hit the door. Not a package delivery gone wrong. 3 slow, firm knocks, spaced out, like someone who knew someone was home and wasn't in a hurry. I lay there for a moment waiting. Nothing. I told myself it was Gerald. Maybe a late-night confusion, some kind of senior moment. Or maybe I dreamed it. I went back to sleep. The second knock came the following night. Same time almost exactly. After 11 a.m. Same pattern, 3 knocks, spaced, deliberate. This time I sat up. I got out of bed and walked to the front door and stood in the hallway listening. The apartment was silent. I looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. The street beyond was still. One street light flickering slightly down the block. No movement anywhere. I went upstairs and knocked on Gerald's door the next morning. Asked if he'd heard anything unusual overnight. He said no. He sleeps with a white noise machine and wouldn't hear anything. He asked if I wanted him to call his nephew who works in the sheriff's office. I said no. Told him it was probably nothing. I should have said yes. The third night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the TV muted and just waited. 3 a.m. came and went. Nothing. 3:30. Nothing. I was starting to feel ridiculous. I'd been sitting in my own living room in the dark for 40 minutes because of 2 late-night knocks. I got up to get water from the kitchen. The knock came at 3:47. I froze in the kitchen doorway. 3 knocks, slower this time, more deliberate. Like whoever it was knew I was awake. Like they'd been watching the lights, I called out. I said, "Who's there?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. No answer. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer came within 20 minutes. He checked the front porch, the driveway, the side of the building. Nothing. No one hiding in the shrubs, no cars that shouldn't be there. He told me to call the same number if it happened again and to consider a camera for the front door. I ordered one online at 4 a.m. The camera arrived the next afternoon. I installed it above the front door before 6 p.m., one of those video doorbells that records motion and sends clips to my phone. I tested it twice, it worked. I felt better. That night I went to bed closer to midnight. The camera would catch whatever this was and then I'd have something concrete. At 3:08 a.m. my phone buzzed. Motion alert, I grabbed it. Opened the app. Live feed, nobody on the front porch. The motion had triggered. I could see in the clip that the camera had activated, but the porch was empty. The street was still. Then I saw it in the corner of the live feed. Just at the edge of the camera's range. The shadow of legs. Someone standing just to the left of the porch, out of the direct camera view. Partially visible. Not moving. My heart started going hard. I watched the live feed. The shadow didn't move for 90 seconds. I counted. Then the legs turned and walked away, moving right, disappearing out of frame entirely. No knock that night. They'd seen the camera and adjusted. That hit me differently than the knocks had. The knocks could still have been a confused neighbor. A prank, some random drunk. Someone who saw my camera and changed their position was not random. That was deliberate. That was someone thinking about what they were doing. I called Priya. She told me to come to her place. I almost did. Instead, I made a mistake. I decided to check if the back door was locked. I walked through the apartment to the kitchen and the back entrance. The back door was unlocked. I stood there staring at it. I always lock that door. Every night. It's part of my routine. Front door, back door, chain on front. I'd done it since I moved in. The back door was unlocked, and when I looked more closely at the frame, there was a fresh scratch on the metal plate around the lock. Small. like something had been worked into the gap. I did not sleep in that apartment that night. I called 911, not the non-emergency line. 2 officers came. They took the backdoor situation seriously in a way the previous officer hadn't, because now it wasn't just knocking. It was potential tampering. They photographed the scratch marks, took a report, and one of them said it looked consistent with someone testing the lock with a tool. He asked if I had any idea who might be doing this. I didn't. He asked if anything had been stolen or moved inside the apartment. I walked through every room with the officers. Nothing taken. Nothing visibly moved. But in my bedroom on the windowsill there was a cigarette butt that had not been there before. The window was locked. It was on the outside ledge, barely visible, but there, someone had stood at that window long enough to smoke a cigarette. My bedroom window faced the side yard, the side that wasn't covered by my camera. I moved out within 2 weeks. Stayed at Priya's while I broke the lease. I couldn't stay in that apartment and sleep. I don't care about the lost deposit. I don't care about the hassle of moving. None of that matters. The police never identified anyone. No arrests, no suspects. The scratches on the lock weren't enough to charge anyone with. The shadow in the camera footage was too partial to identify. Gerald told me before I left that one morning, about 3 weeks before all this started. He'd come home from his morning walk and noticed a man standing across the street, just looking at the building. He hadn't thought much of it. He described him briefly: average height, baseball cap, dark jacket. I asked why he hadn't mentioned it before. He said he didn't think it was important. I moved into a second-floor apartment with a deadbolt and chain, and a camera covering every entrance. I check the footage every morning before I start my day. The cigarette butt still bothers me more than anything else. Not because someone stood at my window, because they stood there long enough to finish one. Story 2. I was home alone when I heard someone in the attic. It wasn't an animal. I know what animals sound like in a ceiling. This was footsteps. I'm 31. I own a small ranch house in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. I've lived there for about 3 years. Bought it after a brief spell of doing well at my job in pharmaceutical sales. The house is older, built in the late 60s, and it has all the noises old houses have. Pipes that tick, floors that shift. The particular groan the garage door makes in cold weather. I know every sound this house makes. That's important to understand. I am not someone who spooks easily in my own home. My husband travels for work. Not constantly, but often. Maybe 1 week out of every 3. I'm used to being alone in the house. I have a dog, a 4-year-old shepherd mix named Remy, who makes me feel safer. I've spent dozens of nights here alone and never felt anything I couldn't explain. Until January of this past year. He'd been gone since Sunday. It was Wednesday evening. I'd been working from home, made dinner, was sitting on the couch watching something around 9 p.m. when Remy got off the couch and walked to the center of the room and stood there, ears up, head tilted toward the ceiling. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Remy held his position for about 30 seconds, then came back to the couch and settled. I told myself it was probably the pipes. The temperature had dropped sharply that day, been single digits overnight, and the house contracts in the cold. Things pop and shift. I turned the volume back up. 20 minutes later, Remy did it again. This time I heard it too, a sound from directly above the living room. Not the attic crawl space in the hall, directly above me where there's nothing but insulation and the underside of the roof. A soft, irregular shifting, not the pop of contracting wood. The wrong rhythm for that, too organic, too spaced. I sat very still and listened for 2 full minutes. It didn't repeat. I checked the attic access hatch in the hallway. It's a simple pull-down panel with a small ladder. It was closed the way I always left it. I stood on a step stool and pushed on it to make sure the latch was engaged. It was. I convinced myself it was squirrels. They get into attics in Ohio winters constantly. I'd had them before in a previous apartment, scratching in the walls. This was probably the same thing, just bigger. I went to bed. Thursday night the sounds were back. Louder. Remy heard them before I did. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I saw him in the hallway, completely still, staring upward at the ceiling. Not growling, not barking, just watching. I stood in the hallway and listened. The sound was above the hallway this time, slow, heavy, rhythmic. Evenly spaced, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, not a squirrel, not a raccoon, not contracting wood. That pattern was intentional. That was weight being shifted from one point to another in a deliberate sequence. My hands were cold before my brain had fully processed what that meant. I texted my husband. I told him I was hearing something in the attic and it didn't sound like an animal. He called me immediately. He said it was probably an animal, that I should call an exterminator in the morning, that old houses amplify sounds in strange ways. I wanted to believe him. I almost did, then I asked him when he'd last been in the attic. He said October. He'd gone up to get some boxes. I asked if he'd left the small camping lantern up there. He said yes. He'd meant to bring it down and forgot. I said the camping lantern was on when I looked up at the attic hatch earlier that evening. I could see light through the hatch seam. I hadn't thought about it at the time because I wasn't looking for something wrong. The line was quiet for a moment. He said, "Get out of the house." I grabbed Remy's leash, my phone, my keys, and walked out the front door in under 60 seconds. I didn't stop to get a coat. I sat in my car in the driveway with the doors locked and called 911. 2 officers arrived in about 8 minutes. I stayed in the car. They went in with flashlights drawn. I watched from the driveway, Remy in my lap, the engine running and the heat on, my hands still shaking. The first officer came out 4 minutes later. He asked me to step out of the car. He said there was no one in the attic currently, but the pull-down hatch had been accessed recently. There were scuff marks on the frame consistent with repeated use, and the insulation near the entrance had been disturbed and partially cleared in an area large enough for a person to sit. There were 2 items that didn't belong there: a fast food bag with recent garbage inside, and a phone charger plugged into the attic's single outlet. Someone had been living in my attic. Not for one night. The food wrappers suggested multiple visits at minimum. The charger suggested someone comfortable enough to charge a device. Someone who knew the layout of my house well enough to find the outlet. The police swept the entire property, the yard, the garage, the crawl space under the house. No one was found. They dusted the attic access hatch for prints. They got some partials. I don't know what came of it because the investigation went quiet and my follow-up calls were never returned with specific information. What I know is this: whoever it was knew my husband traveled. They knew when the house would have only one person in it. They knew the attic well enough to find the outlet and use it regularly. That means they'd been watching the house. For how long, I don't know. I stayed with a friend for 2 weeks while we had the attic access replaced with a keyed hatch and had the exterior of the roof checked for any secondary entry points. The inspector found a loose soffit vent on the north side of the house, large enough for a person to get through if they removed it from outside. It had been removed and replaced. Multiple times. You could see the wear marks on the screws. My husband cut his travel schedule significantly after that. We have cameras on every exterior surface now. The new attic hatch has a padlock. Remy still sometimes stares at the ceiling at night. I pretend not to notice. Story 3. The person outside my window was there every night for 2 weeks. I saw the same shadow in the same spot so many times that I started to think I was losing my mind. Then my neighbor confirmed it, and that made it so much worse. I'm 24. I live alone in a small rental house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I teach 2nd grade at an elementary school about 12 minutes from my house. My days are early, up at 6, at school by 7:30, home by 4:30, and bed by 10 most weeknights. I'm not a particularly anxious person. I grew up in a rural area and I've never been someone who gets scared of normal. Nighttime sounds or dark yards. My house is a small, single story with a front bedroom. My bedroom. That faces the side yard and the fence line that separates my property from my neighbors. The window has curtains, but I usually sleep with them mostly open because I like the morning light. That detail matters. The window faces a side yard that's narrow, maybe 10 feet wide between my house and the wooden privacy fence. Nothing has ever happened in that side yard. There's nothing there. No lights, no foot traffic, no reason for anyone to be in that space. My neighbors on that side are a quiet couple in their 60s named the Tremaines. Their driveway is on the opposite side of their house. The first night I saw the shadow was a Thursday in February. I'd gotten up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. On my way back to bed, I glanced at the window. Not intentionally, just the way you look at things in your path. And I saw a shape against the curtain. Not clearly, not dramatically, just a slight darkening of the fabric where something on the other side was blocking the ambient light from the street. I stood there looking at it for a second. It was the shape of a person's shoulder and the edge of a head. I told myself it was a shadow, a tree branch, the way the streetlight was hitting something at an angle. I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling for 10 minutes. Then I got up and looked again. Whatever it was gone. I closed the curtains fully and went to sleep. The next night I checked before I went to bed. Curtains open a few inches, the side yard visible, empty, the fence line, the narrow strip of grass, nothing. I went to sleep. At some point in the night, I don't know the time, something woke me. Not a sound. That particular sense of presence that doesn't have an explanation. I turned toward the window. The shadow was there again. Same position, shoulder and partial head silhouette against the curtain fabric. I didn't move. I lay in my bed and looked at it and tried to slow my breathing down. It didn't move either. It just was there. After maybe 5 minutes, I reached over very slowly for my phone on the nightstand. By the time I'd turned the screen on and looked back at the window, it was gone. I sat up, checked the time. 2:17 a.m. I should have called someone. I know that now. Instead, I told myself for the second time that it was a shadow. The shape of something ordinary caught in the light from a certain angle. I kept the curtains closed after that. I told myself that solved it. I was wrong. Over the following week and a half, the feeling continued. I kept the curtains closed, but I could sense, and I know how that sounds, that someone was on the other side of the window at night. 2 or 3 times I heard a faint sound from that side. Not loud, not dramatic. The soft compression of grass underfoot, the almost inaudible sound of fabric against the wooden fence. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I moved my phone from the nightstand to under my pillow. I lay awake longer and longer each night. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to seem irrational. That's the part I regret most. The morning that changed everything was a Tuesday. I was leaving for school about 7:20 a.m., and I walked past the side yard on my way to the driveway. I looked over at the fence out of habit. There was a clear impression in the soft ground along the fence line. Not one footprint, multiple. A compressed, worn section of grass about a foot wide that ran parallel to my bedroom window for maybe 6 feet. The kind of wear pattern that comes from repeated standing in the same spot. The grass was matted flat. It hadn't been cut short, it was pressed down. Like someone had been standing in that exact strip of ground many times. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Then I went next door and knocked on the Tremaine's door. Mrs. Tremaine answered. I asked her, trying to sound casual, if she or her husband ever walked along that side fence at night. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "No. But my husband mentioned to me last week that he'd seen someone standing over there late at night twice. He thought it was you. He thought it was me, standing in my own side yard at 2 a.m. Neither of them had said anything because they thought it was me. I went back inside and called the police immediately. A female officer came within 20 minutes and I walked her through everything. The shadows, the sounds, the matted grass. What Mrs. Tremaine had told me. She took it seriously. She photographed the worn area along the fence. She knocked on the Tremaine's door and took a statement from Mr. Tremaine, who confirmed he had seen a figure there on 2 separate nights, standing still facing my bedroom window. That officer told me the behavior described, repeated presence at a bedroom window over multiple nights, was something they treated as a serious threat regardless of whether contact had been made. She said she would escalate the report and that detectives might follow up. She asked if I had any idea who it might be. A former relationship, a student's parent. Anyone with any reason to target me. I went through every possibility and came up empty. She advised me to close and lock every window and to not open them at night regardless of the heat. She advised a camera covering the side yard. She said if I heard or saw anything else, I should call 911, not the non-emergency line. I had a camera installed on the side of the house the next day, pointed directly at that fence line. I changed the lock on my front door and had a locksmith check all the windows. I texted my best friend Callie everything, and she drove up from New Orleans that Friday and stayed a week without being asked. The camera captured nothing for the first 4 days. On the 5th day, at 2:09 a.m. it captured a figure, entering from the back corner of the fence line, walking slowly along the fence toward my bedroom window, stopping at the matted section, standing there for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, then leaving the way they came, facing the window the entire time. I gave the footage to the police. They said it was too dark and the figure too distant to identify. They said they would continue monitoring. I moved out the following month. I broke the lease and moved into an apartment complex with a gate and an on-site manager. I sent the police my new address and kept the old camera footage backed up on 2 separate drives. The figure in the footage was never identified. The detectives never called back after the first month, and sometimes even now. In my new place on the 3rd floor with the windows locked and the curtains drawn, I wake up at 2 a.m. for no reason I can explain, and I don't look at the window.